Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Wednesday edition of Point of View, and looking forward to this great opportunity to spend some time with you. And if you are tuning in, thank you so very much for doing so. Thought I'd spend just a little bit of time, and I do mean a little bit of time, talking about the Democratic National Convention. We've had 2 nights now, so basically half done. 2 more nights and it is over. And as many of us predicted and expected, the number of people tuning in is much lower, not just by a few percentage points, but by a lot. It's easy to explain, and that is when it's a virtual convention, and maybe you've been on your Zoom call all day, and then you go home. What do you want to watch? Another essentially Zoom call. I still can't help but wonder, couldn't they have done some of this in front of an audience that maybe isn't as large as one that would have been in a typical convention, where you have people dancing in the aisles, wearing funny hats and saying all sorts of things. But again, you can't generate a great deal of enthusiasm. And because you don't have any enthusiasm, you don't have anybody applauding, you don't have applause lines, a lot of it just simply falls flat. And it's interesting to see whether or not the Republicans can learn from this, because if nothing else, you know that if there's one person that feeds off the energy of the crowd, it is Donald Trump. By the way, there's another person that feeds off the energy of the crowd, and that would be Barack Obama. We'll have a chance to hear from him, and Bill Clinton, which was as flat as it possibly could have been for all sorts of reasons. But nevertheless, that is the case. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about this, other than a little bit later we'll get to one of the articles I've posted on a few facts to know about the Democratic platform, which will surface as we talk about a few issues. But one of the better speakers so far that we've had was, of course, Michelle Obama, and an individual that seemed to, for a couple of times, leave some very important issues out. And so it was helpful to find this, that while there were people that praised what she had to say, there was a notable omission, and that was the fact that the former First Lady never mentioned Senator Kamala Harris, considering how much has been made of the fact that this was a historic selection. I don't think how historic it is. It was historic to have the first African-American in the White House, Barack Obama. I think it's maybe at least a couple pegs down to talk about the possibility could have a woman of color, because she's not African-American, she's Jamaican and Indian in terms of her background, but the first woman of color to be vice president. But again, there was nothing said about her, and that omission really kind of resonated. And so, fortunately, CNN's Jake Tapper cleared that up and said, if you're wondering why there was no reference in Michelle Obama's speech to Kamala Harris, her speech was taped before Harris was selected to be Biden's running mate, and that's according to a number of people that had been interviewed by CNN. Okay, that brings us to another question. Okay, so there's obviously a reason why she didn't mention it, but just think this through. That means that nobody in the Biden campaign didn't give her more advance notice. That would suggest that if she did not know, this had to have been taped almost 2 weeks ago, which shows you how insignificant in some respects she thought that it was. For a virtual convention, there's no travel, there's no requirement. And for those of us that sometimes do a videotaping and then find out that there was a mistake, or there was something we left out, or we mispronounced a word, what do? We go back, get in front of the same camera, wear the same outfit, we do a cutaway, and then we insert that in there. And so it was just, again, almost like just phoning it in, which caused a lot of people to really be somewhat questioning that, for sure. And, of course, another tip-off should have been that she mentioned the fact that 150,000 were dead of COVID-19, when at that time the number was at about 170,000. So this was obviously taped 20,000 deaths ago. So you can get a little bit of an idea. Now, of course, 150,000 could have been just rounded down rather than rounded up, but still, it was at least answering the question. But then when you get the answer, you really get a little bit questioning as well. The response, of course, has been unbelievably enthusiastic, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But it was kind of interesting. James Woods said, one of the things that indeed Michelle Obama was doing was giving a beautiful endorsement, that was the words that were used so often, of course, Joe Biden. And so then, just to have a little bit of fun at her expense, James Wood pulled out this video clip, which you can see under Real James Woods, of her in 35 seconds talking about the character and the effort and the work of Harvey Weinstein. Oh, wait a minute. An individual that had a history of preying on beautiful young actresses who eventually put him in a criminal courtroom and put him in prison. And so, again, there are all sorts of people that from time to time certainly like to bring up some of the past misdeeds, which brings me to one of the other comments that was made about why Bill Clinton. I love what Jim Garrity said. There's no law that says a former president has to speak at the party's convention. And when there was a survey done by CBS News of who individuals in the Democratic Party wanted to see, the person that rated the lowest was Bill Clinton. There were 44% of Democrats that say they absolutely did not want him to actually speak. And, of course, which, by the way, was even lower than John Kasich and some of the others. That was kind of interesting. We'll get to John Kasich in just a minute. But nevertheless, of course, what came out just the day before were the pictures, which are in the Daily Mail, which you can see. And these are photos of Bill Clinton getting a neck massage from this 22-year-old who, of course, has been accusing Jeffrey Epstein of sexual abuse. And, of course, the argument that has always come from the Clinton Foundation and the Clinton family is that, well, yeah, Bill Clinton flew a couple of times on Epstein's plane, but it was only 4 times. But if you go back and look at the flight logs for what was called the Lolita Express, you have Bill Clinton on there at least 26 times, and there may have been a few times, of course, when he was on that he was not in the flight logs, which led to an interesting counterpoint on CNN. Anderson Cooper put together a panel that included people that were glowing about the fact that Bill Clinton was going to speak. That would be people like Van Jones. And also on the panel was the former Democratic Michigan Governor Jennifer Granholm. But there was also somebody else on that panel, Scott Jennings, who writes, by the way, for CNN and also is on CNN pretty often. And you've seen him on USA Today and Los Angeles Times and a number of other places where he's written. And so, you have Van Jones talking about, well, we got the big dog coming tonight. And so he was all excited. Granholm talks about Bill Clinton is going to bring it all home on the economy. And then you have, interesting enough, Scott Jennings saying, I am dumbfounded by this. How is it that Bill Clinton has not been canceled by the Democrats? How has he survived all these waves of cancellation? And he's out there, one of the biggest violators of these rules all these years. At that point, then, of course, it devolved into crosstalk where everybody's complaining, everybody's saying, well, don't you believe in redemption? And he made up for his shortcomings decades ago, but it didn't go well over at CNN, as many people wanted to not forget the history of Bill Clinton. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
America is currently in the midst of a contentious debate about whether to open the public schools and how to do it. Parents, teachers, and administrators have concerns about the risks and safety. Those are legitimate concerns that need to be addressed. But what needs to be called out are the actions of some of the teachers' unions. For most of us, the pandemic represents a public health problem. For many of the teachers' unions, it provides an opportunity to leverage state legislatures and put charter schools out of business. The editors of the Wall Street Journal say there's a phrase for that: political extortion. Another commentator called it educational blackmail. Give it the label you feel most appropriate. It's not a good look for educators. The American Federation of Teachers declared their support for safety strikes if local unions didn't approve of steps used in school districts to address the virus. Earlier this month, an alliance of teachers unions and progressive groups sponsored a national day of resistance and listed their demands before returning to the classroom. Most of the demands have little to do with education and can't even be addressed by school boards. They range from canceling rents and mortgages to passing Medicare for all to passing a wealth tax. A few demands do relate to schools, like implementing a moratorium on voucher programs and standardized tests, along with moving towards police-free schools. These teachers' unions also want a moratorium on charter schools and want governors and other political leaders to also close private schools. Public schools are funded whether they're open or not. Private and religious schools rely on tuition and donations. You know, many of these teachers' unions seem less interested in finding ways to open schools safely and more interested in threatening strikes to get their progressive wish list. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Racism, go to viewpoints.info/racism. That's viewpoints.info/racism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if we can, for just a few more minutes, talk about the convention. That leads directly to one of the articles I've posted on the Democratic platform. I was going to post the platform today, but we do have a debate on it, although it looks like it's going to pass almost unanimously. I'll get back to that in just a minute. There are some that are very much against it, but there's not going to be a floor flight, and as soon as it is actually ratified, we will post it. But I have a very good piece here that Jonathan Easley and some others have put together on 5 things to know about the Democratic platform. But before we get to it, we can already get a sense about which view of the platform and of a future Biden presidency is more accurate, because you had an sort of unintentional point-counterpoint during the convention. And it happened between John Kasich and Bernie Sanders. Now, if you're not familiar, a lot of people say, well, who's Governor Kasich? Well, he was the former governor of Ohio, and he starts his presentation when he's standing out there in a field. And why some people think that's a better venue, I do not know, but that was where he was. And he says, you know, I'm a lifelong Republican, but these are not normal times. And he went on to then begin to praise the decency and wisdom of Joe Biden. He says, I'm sure there are Republicans and independents who couldn't possibly imagine crossing over to support a Democrat. They fear Joe might turn sharp left and leave them behind. I don't believe that. Now, he can believe what he wants, but the reality is, and I think it's fair to say, without trying to be a partisan at all, that the positions that Joe Biden has adopted over just these last few months, since this time last year, are remarkably more to the left than they were. In just a minute, I'm going to talk about some of that, which is in the platform as well. But he basically says, I know the measure of the man. He's reasonable. He's faithful. You know, no one pushes Joe around. That was sort of the argument by his wife, who I think gave one of the best speeches last night, Dr. Jill Biden, who is really one of the most likable people on that stage. I mean, some of these people, you go, I'm not even sure I want to sit across the table and have coffee with them, much less get involved in a debate with them. But you have to appreciate that. And again, they're all just saying, you know, he stands for these principles. But I think everybody looking at Joe Biden knows he doesn't even sometimes know which day it is. I went into a doctor's office the other day because I had to get this one physical for this insurance policy. And in the midst of checking me out, he says, okay, where are you right now? I'm saying I'm in the doctor's office. What year is it? It's August 13th, 2020. Oh, okay. I mean, they do this now in these doctor's offices to see whether or not you've developed Alzheimer's or dementia of some sort. And Joe Biden doesn't seem like he's the man who even was like this 2 years ago, but that's neither the case, because now the argument being made by the former governor of Ohio, John Kasich, is no one pushes Joe around. Well, our friends at the Wall Street Journal, the editors said this was contradicted 25 minutes later when Bernie Sanders arrived to declare an ideological victory. Senator Bernie Sanders said, let me offer you just a few examples of how Joe will move us. Are you ready for this? Move us forward. We just heard he won't be pushed around. Now, here's how he's moving you forward. And I'll just give you one or two quotes out of Bernie Sanders. Joe supports raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Joe will fund universal pre-K for 3 or 4-year-olds. Joe will fight the threat of climate change by transitioning us to 100% clean electricity over the next 15 years. Which is a code word for what? The Green New Deal. And he'll lower the eligibility of Medicare from 65 down to 60. Of course, he didn't say that he will endorse Medicare for all, but that is the case. So the editors of the Wall Street Journal, which have never really been fans of certainly Donald Trump, simply said that more than a few Republicans think Donald Trump's character and temperament are so flawed he can't be trusted with the presidency. They said, fair enough, character matters. But please don't pretend that a Biden victory with a Democratic House and likely Senate will produce a centrist revelation of the bipartisan comedy. If anything, they say Bernie Sanders probably has more insight on this one than John Kasich. So, again, you had kind of almost like a point-counterpoint. John Kasich trying to say, Joe Biden, he's not going to get pushed around. He's got strong, firm principles, which I think would be hard to say with any seriousness when you see how he's changed his mind on the Hyde Amendment and on some of these various health care issues and all the rest. But, okay, you're entitled to your own opinion, but you are not entitled to your own facts, and the facts really go the other direction. So before we take a break, let me finish by talking about one of the articles we've posted. Now, this is by Jonathan Easley. He's not a partisan. If anything, he probably will be giving benefit to the doubt to some of the people in the Democrat Party. So I thought this was kind of a good balanced view rather than looking at how some partisan, either a Democrat who believes in the platform or a Republican that wants to attack it. Here's one that hopefully is trying to play it a little closer down the middle. Then we're going to get to this conspiracy of the fact that all sorts of people under President Trump's aegis are running around with MAGA hats on, actually taking down post office boxes and actually going to try to steal the election. But we'll get to that in just a minute. 5 things real quickly. Number 1, not every Democrat is backing the platform. That's pretty obvious. You have a number of very progressive lawmakers that have announced that they will vote against it when that vote takes place. But again, there is no reason to believe that that opposition will be large enough for there to be anything like a floor fight, since you don't really have the mechanism for that to happen anyway. I see, by the way, in the future, some of these progressives are just saying, we're never going to put up with this again because you've been able to railroad things through, which we actually wanted to challenge. But first of all, not every Democrat supports the platform. Fair enough. Number two, the platform seeks to paper over some very significant differences. There you go. The Democrats were trying to present everything from Governor John Kasich to Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who, by the way, got all of 60 seconds, 1 minute, but nevertheless, you got her on there. And so there is some nods to some of the protests, tearing down and removing Confederate symbols. There is a thing that talks about chokeholds, but it doesn't make any mention of some of the phrases that have been used, like defund the police. The platform specifically does not mention and use the phrase Green New Deal, but if you read a little bit further, you will see that the platform warns that climate change is a global emergency. We have no time to waste in taking action to protect American lives and futures. So if you're having any discernment, you can read between the lines, seeing that it doesn't explicitly endorse the Green New Deal, but then it basically endorses the Green New Deal. And then there's some statements about trade, all of which sound exactly like they were written by Senator Bernie Sanders, talked about how the trade deals have sold out American workers and those kinds of things, and attacked the various past of trade deals that were passed under the Clinton administration, like the North American Free Trade Agreement and a number of others. And so you can see that that one looks very much like Bernie Sanders. Number three, Democrats embrace the public option with a nod to Medicare for all. There's been, of course, an internal debate with the Democrats between, do we endorse the Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez Medicare for all, or do we just simply say, we have Obamacare, can we expand it? And, of course, Biden won the nomination, so in some respects you expect that part of the platform to simply talk about sticking to the center, maintaining that Democrats can eventually fix it. But if you start looking at some of the criticism there, you can see that essentially what it is doing is giving very clear support to the idea of Medicare for all. And for those of you that don't listen to the program on a regular basis, Medicare for all doesn't mean that you're going to keep your Medicare. No, Medicare for all means that you will lose your Medicare. It's just a phrase that is used to make you feel better about it. And then the coronavirus is a top focus for Democrats. Of course, Joe Biden has made that as a very significant part of his criticism of Trump's leadership. It's shown up in the last two nights. It will show up certainly tonight and tomorrow night with some of the comments by Kamala Harris as well as by Joe Biden. And then finally, this very good piece by Jonathan Easley also talks about the fact that the tougher internal fights will come. Taken as a whole, he says the Democrats' platform is designed with a very simple strategy in mind. Unite the party for the sake of defeating Trump in November. But as soon as they get into office, if indeed Donald Trump is defeated and Joe Biden becomes the next president, then a lot of these internal arguments, the fissures as it's described here in this, will begin to surface, and you'll see how radical or non-radical some of those proposals end up becoming. And so, if nothing else, the platform may not explicitly endorse the things we've talked about, although it does, in a few cases, really endorse them. It's pretty obvious what would be accomplished under a Biden-Harris presidency, vice presidency. And we'll take a break. Talk about this post office conspiracy right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Okay, let's talk about the post office conspiracy. It really just angers me that we even have to do this, and it has been perpetuated by people that I know have to know better. If they don't, then those individuals in office shouldn't be in office. And of course, that's another argument that I've made over the years about why when people say, I trust the government, I go, you don't understand these people. You really have to look at some of the people that work in the bureaucracy. You have to look at some of the people that win elective office and how much they don't know about some of the things that you would have expected them to know about. And so, again, don't always trust that these are our superiors and that they have superior intellect and wisdom. Sometimes they do. That's why some of them get hired, but many of them do not. And I think you'll figure this out. If you haven't seen the conspiracy, let me just quote a few. Since we've been talking about Joe Biden, he says that tractor trailers are picking up mailboxes. You have members of Congress who want to throw the Postmaster General in jail. He, by the way, the Postmaster General, who has just taken office a couple of months ago, and I'll talk more about him in just a minute, actually will be testifying on Friday. Heard somebody on a talk show erroneously say he was going to be on Monday. That was one of the things that Donald Trump was upset about. You're going to pull the Postmaster General in during the Republican convention to counter program against us, which, again, Donald Trump, didn't he give a speech yesterday? And he's going to give another speech on Thursday just before the Democratic convention. Okay, but anyway, that's part of it. Then you have all these posters that you see that talk about mailboxes being taken. You have some of these photos tweeted by members of Congress, by, in one case, an actress and others. Well, basically almost suggesting that some of these individuals in the Postal Service wearing Make America Great hats are going to be stealing the election, which again, at its face, is hilarious, because if you look at this, the American Postal Workers Union and the National Association of Letter Carriers basically have already endorsed Joe Biden. So that should really help you see that very quickly. I have posted an article that comes from the National Review on, again, the Postal Service is not stealing the election. And you can read that, but I thought I would pull from another good piece that just came out today. I guess it came out yesterday, but I hadn't seen it till today, by David Ditch, which looks at 10 myths about the U.S. Postal Service. I'm only going to look at maybe half a dozen of them, but one of those has been the argument that the U.S. Postal Service is removing sorting machines to sabotage delivery. According to this particular post by NBC News, the Postmaster General is decommissioning 671 U.S. Postal Service letter sorting machines, and that, many people, they argue, is going to hamper the ability to deal with mail-in ballots. I'm going to get back to that in just a minute. But the reality to this is that the volume of mail has plunged in the last couple of decades due to the spread of electronic communication. And so the infrastructure that is necessary to even begin to handle that load of mail has dropped precipitously. And so it wasn't until we had the general postmaster to actually come in, and who is, by the way, an expert on infrastructure and logistics. I'll say more about him in just a minute, that he decided that maybe we should remove those. Now, just so that all these people screaming about this will get their way, he announced just the other day that, okay, we're not going to make any of these changes just because you're complaining about it. We will not make any of these changes till after the election, but these are changes that should have happened long ago, and simply nobody wants to do them. But when you have somebody that comes in from the outside who's an expert on logistics, he says, why do we have these machines? We don't need them. Let's decommission them. As soon as we do, of course, then it's part of a conspiracy. Okay, myth number 2. The U.S. Post Office and the Postal Service is removing collection boxes to block mail-in ballots. In case you've ever wondered this, there are 141,000 of those blue collection boxes across the country. These boxes, by the way, are regularly moved from low-demand areas to high-demand areas to maximize efficiency. And so the picture that somebody saw the other day where they were moving some of those collection boxes to another place wasn't mean we're taking them offline. We're just putting them in places where they're going to have a greater opportunity to be used. Number 3, Postal Service is locking collection boxes to prevent public access. Again, I just wonder, where did this come from? One of these tweets, in your entire life, have you ever seen a locked mailbox? Yes. Do you guys just not get out? Okay, let me give you the explanation for this one. You probably don't go to the inner city very often, but, come with me to Chicago. We used to do that when I would go up there to Moody Broadcasting. I'll take you to Cabrini Green down in the south there. Come with me to New York. Next time we go to New York, I'll take you over where Harlem. You'll see some of those boxes locked. Now, why are they locked? Well, this is what they do. The lock caps are put on these collection boxes in areas where there's been a rash of mail theft. So what the employees of the Postal Service do is after they collect the mail at the final pickup of the day, they put those locks on there because most of the theft from these mailboxes happens when? At night. Don't these people get out at all? I don't even get this one. And by the way, this practice, if you think this was something that was done during the Trump administration, this practice has been going on long before Donald Trump even thought about running for office, much less before he was president. Again, another conspiracy theory. I'm running out of patience, but let's get a few more. Myth number 4, the Postal Service could go bankrupt before the election without a $25 billion bailout. This one comes, interestingly enough, from an elected member of Congress. This would be Representative Jerry Nadler, arguing that we need another $25 billion infusion into the U.S. Postal Service. And so, again, the reality here is that Congress provided a $10 billion loan to the Postal Service earlier this year. And there's, of course, been a battle over how much more in the most recent COVID-19 pandemic bailout would actually go to the post office. But because some of the Democrats wanted to also try to put in all sorts of extra pork, I love what one individual said. If you read through that particular piece of legislation, you see the word cannabis more than you see the word jobs or work, which tells you a lot about that. So, again, that is the case. Okay, here's one that, all right, I can see why people maybe don't understand this. The post office is going to triple postage rates on mailed ballots. The actual post, and this is a Twitter post, Postal Service has informed states that they'll need to pay first-class 55-cent postage to mail ballots to voters rather than the normal 20-cent bulk rate. That nearly triples the per-ballot cost. Well, not quite triple, but okay, I'll concede the point. And this has to do with the ongoing debate between the post office and these states. Some of these states say you can actually request a mail-in ballot just days before the November 3rd election. And the post office is saying, first of all, when you say that, we can't guarantee that we will be able to get them a mail-in ballot. But more importantly, if you say that they can mail it in just days before the election, then they're going to have to use a first-class stamp. They can't just use the low-cost second-class mail. Does that make some sense? Of course it does. Now, if you are going to vote absentee, and you know right now you can request a ballot. You can send it in October, and you can be sure that it will get there with a 20-cent second-class stamp. But if you are in the latter part of October, maybe it's Halloween, and you want it to get there by that following Tuesday, you're probably going to have to put a 55-cent stamp on that. Is that a conspiracy? No, that's just obvious. It should be obvious anyway. One more. The Postal Service delivery changes on illegal sabotage by the Postmaster General. The argument here is this individual who has actually been put in this position, Postmaster Joy, actually used to be the CEO of New Breed Logistics, which is a supply chain company. He is an expert in this area, and their industry is focused on maximizing cost-efficient, on-time performance in other areas, and wanted to take that same expertise here to the Postal Service. And yet I am convinced that he is going to be vilified on Friday, and make him really wonder whether or not he should have just stayed in retirement and forgot all of that. The final one, I guess I can mention real quickly, the post office needs more money because it's going to have to handle more ballots. In case you wonder, the Postal Service handles 2.75 billion items per week. Almost 3 billion items per week. There is no way that even the addition of some mail-in ballots is going to be anything like the surge that they see during Thanksgiving and Christmas. But you wouldn't know that unless you looked at some of these facts. We'll take a break, come back with more right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
For a few more minutes, let me just mention that next hour we're going to be talking about Bible engagement during COVID-19. We'll be talking with Bob Pritchett, who's the president and CEO of Faithlife, and how, especially when you're locked down, are there some ways to be more effective in Bible study? So I thought that'd be kind of interesting to you. We'll get an update from Eric Mock about what has been happening in Russia. We've talked about that in the past with the Slavic Gospel Association. And then in the following hour, Robert Woodson will be with us, and he is the president of the Woodson Center. We'll be talking about kind of the racial grievance industry, also his 1776 project, which is an attempt to answer the 1619 project of the New York Times, and maybe he has a few comments as well about the way in which we can help those in the African-American community. So those are all things we'll talk about. We were talking about the Postal Service, and I want to move on in just a minute, but even during the break, we were talking about removing mailboxes. And okay, I got this is done with a smile on my face. There are some of us that have lived in rural communities, and my wife reminded me of this the other day, where they do remove the mailboxes. If you go to my brother-in-law's house, you will notice that when he goes out to get the mail, he doesn't just get the mail, he takes the mail and the mailbox inside the house. Now, there's a very good reason for that. And if you've ever been in a rural area, you see that sometimes these mailboxes get removed, not by the Postal Service, but by some kid in a pickup truck who races past them and knocks them down, or a kid in a car or pickup truck with a baseball bat, and this is just a game to knock those post office, those mailboxes off of their stand. And so if you've ever driven in a rural community, you've seen some of these mailboxes that have been riveted down into like an I-beam, the kind that you would use as a girder in a high-rise building, or some of them have chains so that if they hit, they just spin around and then come back again. Because, unfortunately, one of the games that's played sometimes in the rural community is to remove the mailboxes, and it's not being done by the U.S. Postal Service. It's done by a bunch of teenage boys. So I don't think it's girls, but mostly boys. And so, yes, there are some times when people are removing mailboxes, but it has nothing to do with the United States Postal Service. Let's get to another article I've posted. Dennis Prager. You know, people must think I have a love affair with him, but every time I go and find articles, I say, well, there's another really good one. And a while back, he posted something, which I think we posted, Whatever the Left Touches, It Ruins. And in that column, which came out about 2 years ago, he talked about 8 examples of where the left have ruined universities, the arts, sports, even religion, race relations, women's happiness, child's innocence, and even free speech. But now, in this particular one, he adds one more, science. And he gives you 4 examples. I'll mention them real quickly. He said one example of where, again, the left declares objectivity as an example of white supremacy is that now in various science departments and universities, they've declared their intention to hire physicists, biologists, and other scientists based on gender, race, and not scientific expertise. You can look at the candidates, for example, that were being looked at in the short list of the physics department in the University of California at San Diego, which, by the way, is where my brother went for a few years, as well as 2 of my nieces actually went there as well. And they looked at this and said, nope, if you have a male candidate, you have a white one, we just simply can't have those individuals in that area. So that was the end of that. So you can see that that's happened somewhat in the past because of sort of a de facto affirmative action, but it's just gotten a lot worse. Number 2 is another example. The declaration by more than 1,000 doctors and other healthcare providers that despite their previous warnings about public gatherings being health risks, they said, and this is their direct quote, as public health advocates, we do not condemn these gatherings, that is, these mass protests against racism, as risky for COVID-19 transmission. We support them as vital to the national public health. So they contradicted themselves because we like the particular activity that particular protest was part of. And again, just an example of how the left has even ruined the scientific or medical credibility there. The third example he gives is one we've talked about for some time, and that is the complete criticism of the benefits of hydroxychloroquine and zinc during the early years of COVID-19, and then reminds us of something we've talked about before, which has been controversial to a lot of people that have always had such respect for scientific journals, that one of the world's most prestigious medical and scientific journals, that would be The Lancet, which is kind of the journal of record for the United Kingdom, for England, withdrew an article that was actually challenging the effectiveness of hydroxychloroquine for treating COVID-19 patients because the article was completely made up. It had made up data. New York Times reported that the editor-in-chief called the paper and why they actually retracted it a fabrication and a monumental fraud. And so for that to have been published in The Lancet, which, by the way, it also endorsed everybody to support Joe Biden and to vote against Donald Trump. So why even a medical journal is doing that in the UK shows you where their bias was. And then number 4, again, Dennis Prager points out that a good example he also cites is the American Psychological Association, or the APA, chose leftism over psychology by declaring, again, this is a direct quote, 40 years of research show that traditional masculinity is psychologically harmful and that socializing boys to suppress their emotion causes damage that echoes both inwardly and outwardly. And so, again, the whole idea of masculinity is seen as toxic, and they pathologize masculinity. And so if you'd like to read it in its entirety, I'm giving you sort of just a real quick summary of that. But Dennis Prager points out that the left has ruined so many parts of life, but here ruining science itself. While we're talking about science, I thought I'd pass on something that I first noticed when I was reading Jim Dennison's column, because I don't know if you know, we had the closest asteroid flyby ever. That is scary, because you know that if an asteroid of any side hits this planet, we're in a lot of trouble. So it turns out that this asteroid was relatively small and unfortunately undetected, because it was about the size of a pickup truck, but it passed within about 1,800 miles of Earth. That's dangerous. Now, the possibility is given its size, it is, of course, considered a near-Earth object, but, again, it might have broken up in the atmosphere. But do we know that for sure? And even with those pieces, if it landed on your house, be a good thing. Again, 3/4 of the Earth is water. If it landed in the ocean, probably nobody would know. But again, a spokesman for NASA said that they're working now on a space-based infrared telescope that will have better capability to identify similar asteroids, because it turns out we've missed some others in the past. When they're relatively small, we don't see them coming. And if you have a head-on collision with one of these asteroids, it is not a good thing. A recent survey, interestingly enough, found that more Americans prefer a space program that would focus on potential asteroid impacts than on trying to send human beings back to Mars and the moon. And right now, of course, NASA already has awarded a $69 million contract to SpaceX, remember him, Elon Musk, to help with asteroid detection as part of their mission. So something to think about while we're talking about science. We had a near miss, and I'm glad it missed, but it's a reminder that if anything, let's use our science to protect this planet from a head-on collision from an asteroid. And if you want to see what that looks like, there have been at least 2 or 3 science fiction films that talk about that. When we come back, though, we'll talk about Bible engagement in COVID-19 times. We'll be back right after this.
"2020. It's been a pretty eventful year. We've experienced international tensions over the coronavirus and lockdowns, economic uncertainties, cities overrun by protests, rioting, and looters, and coming soon, a presidential election. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kerby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It is easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I think y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View.
And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. Over the next couple of hours, we are on this Wednesday going to spend some time talking about how to be engaged in Bible engagement and how we can use some of these tools that we've talked about here on Point of View before more effectively. You can study God's Word. Get a little bit of a report from our friends at Slavic Gospel Association about one of the projects we worked on in Russia. And then Bob Woodson will be joining us of the Woodson Center, talking about, of course, the convention that has been unfolding over the last 2 days. Democratic National Convention Monday and Tuesday. Of course, you have 2 more days tonight and tomorrow night. Get some thoughts there. Also, he'll be talking about what he calls the racial grievance industry. And so there are lots of things that we're going to be covering. And in this last hour, I'll get into some of the articles we've posted, but you can find those on the website. 5 things to know on the Democratic platform. What we have is a platform that is a draft particular document, but it will be ratified, I suspect, tonight. There is some opposition to it, but I don't see a floor fight. So as soon as that is formally adopted, we will post it on the website, and you can read it for yourself. This is a very good piece that appeared in The Hill by Jonathan Easley and some others that I think does a pretty fair assessment. You know, we didn't want to have one where you had people that were just cheerleaders for the Democratic platform, nor Republicans that are going to be criticizing every page. But here's an attempt to kind of at least say, here's what's said, here's what's not said, here what it means. And so we'll look at some of that certainly in the next hour. So that's one of the pieces that we'll get into. Also, I guess it's about time to debunk some of the conspiracy myths surrounding the U.S. Postal Service. Of course, the Postmaster General will be testifying on Friday, who, as I've begun to research him, is really trying to do a very good job of trying to improve Postal Service. As a former CEO of New Breed Logistics, a supply chain company, brings a lot of expertise there, but you won't know it by all the critical things that will be said about him in his testimony on Friday, and all these erroneous things have been said in some of these Twitter posts. And so we'll take on a little of that in the next hour. And then a piece by our good friend Dennis Prager, who's been in studio with us. Everything the left touches, it ruins. Now add science, because a couple of years ago he had a piece that came out on what the left touches, it ruins, looking at education, the arts, sports, race relations, a variety of other things, including free speech. Now he adds to that science. So all of those are articles we've posted on the website for you to read. And if you'd like to read ahead, those certainly will be helpful to you as we get into some of the conversation a little bit later. But as many of us find ourselves locked down, as many of us have said, well, I'm spending a fair amount of time in front of a screen, why not use those screens to really help us study God's Word? And if you've listened to this program any length of time, you've heard us many times talk about Logos software and what is there at Faithlife. Almost 2 decades ago, I met a guy by the name of Scott Lindsay, who was talking about the Logos software. I've been using it ever since. I get the Bible Study magazine. If you've listened to this program, sometimes we actually do interviews with authors who publish with Lexham Press, and all of that is tied into faithlife.com. You can go to the website. We also have some material we've put on the website on a guide to digital discipleship, and some material on the history and materials that are available from Faithlife. But let me bring to the microphone the president and CEO of Faithlife. That's Bob Pritchett, an individual back when he was all of 15 years of age, developed his first Bible software program, later put together what today we call Logos Bible Software, and he joins us now by phone. So, Bob, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Let's, if we can, tell the story, because it is quite a story. Like I said, I didn't meet you first. I met Scott Lindsay and a number of other people that have been promoting the software. But your story, I think, illustrates why you're in the Bible software business, because even when you were a teenager, that's kind of what you were working on.
Yeah, it really is kind of a life's work at this point, because it's been a long time since I was a teenager. But I went to Christian schools and had Bible class 5 days a week plus Sunday school, and I got tired of using Strong's Concordance, so I wanted to use computers to make that faster, and it's been doing that ever since.
And so it seems to me what you were first doing, just for your own help, is something now that you've developed into a program that not only helps individuals, but I do want to focus, because I know we have pastors and church leaders and others listening, because now you have this technology that really can serve not just individual Christians, but the church. True?
Right. We've been serving pastors and people who study the Bible for, coming up on 30 years now. But with the new Faithlife Equip platform, we're building tools to help the church, manage their members, communicate with people, live stream, just handle all this transition to doing church digitally.
And so, again, a lot of that is church administration, and the more you can do it digitally, the better. Especially, I don't think any of us were expecting the pandemics and lockdown. You're up there in Bellingham, Washington, but so you locked down a little bit more than some of our listeners in some of the other states where we broadcast. But nevertheless, now computers are even more important than they were just a few months ago, don't you think?
Absolutely. People are finding that technology can actually be part of maintaining community through things like Faithlife groups, where they can be in conversation and contact with their church in kind of a safe space without necessarily all your other friends jumping in on Facebook. And we're seeing people use it to manage their communications, as well as things like the live streaming, where they're delivering the services online. So it's been a big shift to that this year.
Well, let's talk about each one of those briefly. One of those is software. I've already alluded to that, and I was one of the almost early adopters. I can remember a time when we used to have DOS base, and then we got to things that were a little bit more useful on my Mac. But now when I go on, it's almost like going onto a website. So over the years, you've adapted the software to make it more user-friendly. And I've always felt that it was pretty user-friendly, but to make it look even more like what would happen when you land on a website.
Absolutely. And we now deliver it on mobile, as well as Windows and Mac laptops, and even on the web at app.logos.com.
And so, again, what you're talking about here is the opportunity for somebody to type in a keyword. And since I was just doing Jeremiah, type in Jeremiah 32, boom, up pops. Okay, the version that I want, at that particular point, it was ESV, but then I can look at some of the others, King James and others. And then I pop up, okay, I need a commentary, pop that open right there. It all is right there. And I've said before that I spent more time in the old days, since I'm older than you, moving a lot of books around, shuffling a lot of books, grabbing things off my shelf, and now at a flick of a snap of my fingers, all of that shows up simultaneously. And then when I think of the number of books that over the years I've added to the commentaries and Bibles and those kinds of things, if I had to have those in a hard version, I'd have to rent a U-Haul truck. So this isn't the advantage really of this new technology.
Yeah, things like our passage guide kind of automate that first step of research. You put in what you're interested in or the passage you want to study, and it kind of collects together the commentaries, all the books in your digital library. And we offer 150,000 different titles, which is about 50% larger than a Barnes & Noble store in terms of how many books that would be physically.
It's just amazing. Let's take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about Bible engagement. And most importantly, we've talked just briefly about the software, but I want to talk about Faithlife TV, also some of the other publishing material, and in particular, those of you that are in church ministry of some sort, you might want to know about the church administrative material and functions. So there's just a lot that we think needs to happen during this pandemic and lockdown. And so we wanted to talk about how to study God's Word most effectively. And we'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
America is currently in the midst of a contentious debate about whether to open the public schools and how to do it. Parents, teachers, and administrators have concerns about the risks and safety. Those are legitimate concerns that need to be addressed. But what needs to be called out are the actions of some of the teachers' unions. For most of us, the pandemic represents a public health problem. For many of the teachers' unions, it provides an opportunity to leverage state legislatures and put charter schools out of business. The editors of the Wall Street Journal say there's a phrase for that: political extortion. Another commentator called it educational blackmail. Give it the label you feel most appropriate. It's not a good look for educators. The American Federation of Teachers declared their support for safety strikes if local unions didn't approve of steps used in school districts to address the virus. Earlier this month, an alliance of teachers unions and progressive groups sponsored a national day of resistance and listed their demands before returning to the classroom. Most of the demands have little to do with education and can't even be addressed by school boards. They range from canceling rents and mortgages to passing Medicare for all to passing a wealth tax. A few demands do relate to schools, like implementing a moratorium on voucher programs and standardized tests, along with moving towards police-free schools. These teachers' unions also want a moratorium on charter schools and want governors and other political leaders to also close private schools. Public schools are funded whether they're open or not. Private and religious schools rely on tuition and donations. Many of these teachers' unions seem less interested in finding ways to open schools safely and more interested in threatening strikes to get their progressive wish list. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Racism, go to viewpoints.info/racism. That's viewpoints.info/racism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Bob Pritchett with us. If you would like to join the conversation, maybe you have a question about Logos software or all the things happening there at Faithlife, feel free to give us a call, 1-800-351-1212. A little bit later this hour, we're going to talk about some of the things happening in Russia with the Slavic Gospel Association, and we'll get into some of the other issues in the news. But Bob, certainly one of the things I always say is when we talk about the software, it's been kind of a who's who of very prominent individuals that we've interviewed on this program that use the software, whether it's Josh McDowell or Tony Evans or Kay Arthur or others. But one thing that I was not aware of, and I want to maybe have you go into maybe some more detail, are all these church management and leadership tools, because as an individual user, I've benefited from what is at Faithlife, but I was unaware, since I'm not in church organization and church issues, there's material for church presentations, there's a sermon archive, there's a whole place for giving and a number of other things. So talk about what would be available, since we have so many people that are pastors that are listening to this program. What can they benefit through some of the material at Faithlife?
Well, we're really building a whole integrated ministry platform. So everything from running your church website to getting email newsletters out to people to Faithlife TV, which is a streaming library of faith-friendly and Bible education content you can play on a Roku or an Apple TV or Amazon Fire. And we're selling Faithlife Equip as one big platform that's completely integrated, because at the heart of our mission is to use technology to equip the church to grow in the light of the Bible. And we believe that, as we first built Bible software, and pastors were not our only users, but they were kind of, our core users, because they're preparing sermons every week. And then pastors, as we started talking to them about what happens with a sermon, well, obviously they deliver it on Sunday morning, but then they want to record it and they want to put up slides with the Bible verses, and they want to see the people in the congregation using a mobile app to follow along, and then they want that recorded sermon to show up on the church website. And that just kind of led us more and more into a really integrated solution as we learned how difficult it was to administer a church, which is like, an organization of hundreds of people kind of coordinated by volunteers and a few overworked staff members. We realized that if we could deliver integration, we could make that experience so much better for everyone in the church staff, and at the same time keep the Bible at the center of everything. And that's really at the heart of what we do, is making the Bible the center, whether it's, putting special features to put Bible on screen in context in your presentations on screens, to helping you literally send signals from your presentations during a sermon to people's phones so that their mobile Bible on their phone jumps to the same verse the pastor is on. All those things are Bible-centered in our platform.
One of the things that I've seen before is that I've been in some churches where I've been waiting to speak or make an announcement, and I will see something put up on the screen, and I'm thinking, okay, for people that have worked in the business field for some time, used to seeing very high-quality PowerPoint or keynote presentations, this one probably makes them cringe a little bit. And so that's something else that you've made available, where pastors and even worship leaders can create sort of high-quality, engaging presentations that are going to be a lot more visibly interesting and well done. And as important as that was, say, a year ago, now that more and more of us are actually consuming church services through Zoom, although we're trying to get back to more in-person worship services, it's made that particular ministry of yours even more important, hasn't it?
Absolutely, and that's why we have our own library of what we call pro media, as well as stock photography. We have people whose job is to shoot photography specifically for the needs of the church, so that we cover all the different ministry areas, the topics, and really have imagery that's suitable and appropriate, and where you don't have to kind of go searching on Google to find, clip art or photos that you randomly grab off the internet. And they're well indexed by the topics and phrases we use in the church. Nice. And then those slides, making beautiful presentation slides so that pastors can present the sermons well and announcements and everything.
Yes. And you mentioned something in passing. I thought maybe you could go into a little more detail, because it's Faithlife TV. That was something else I wasn't aware of, but there are all sorts of documentaries, dramas, and even kids shows. So that's another aspect of video, which is going to be important, because some of these messages are going out on Zoom. And so video, which before was maybe not as important in a church sermon, might be even more key because of just the nature of the way in which we're delivering some of those sermons today through Zoom and a variety of other online technologies, right?
Absolutely. And Faithlife TV lets you integrate your own church's video with our library of thousands of hours of faith-friendly content. So a church that's live streaming and using the Faithlife platform, their live stream will actually show up in Faithlife TV, so you don't have to sit at a laptop or an iPad. You can actually put your live stream of the service up on your big screen TV with your Roku or your Amazon Fire TV device. And then beyond your own church's video, you've got access to a whole library of Bible courses. Our Logos Mobile Education is included when churches subscribe to Faithlife TV for Church, and there's 200-plus courses of 8 to 12 hours of really serious Bible study from well-known seminary professors.
And again, that's almost like a seminary education on your phone, so just some great resources. But let me get to one other, because we put also a link here. It's a free guide people can download, Your Guide to Digital Discipleship. Can technology really help you fulfill the Great Commission? And you have kind of a 6-step strategy, so we've made it available for people to get the download, but when they download that, how can they use some of that material?
So that guide is designed to help anybody build their digital discipleship strategy. As churches are online and want to stay better connected and still be helping people grow in their faith, it's not specific to Faithlife technology, although it introduces how we can provide tools that help, but it really gives you a strategy for how to keep people engaged, connected, and how to see them kind of grow in their walk and their engagement with your church community, even when you have to deal with things remotely.
One other thing I thought I might just mention is some of the other products. You have ebooks. I know we've mentioned Lexham Press. I think there's also a Kirkdale Press. We have, over these last few months, I know, done a number of interviews with individuals that have published with your publishing house, because you're producing some of these Bible study materials, some of these more scholarly works. And so that's just another resource that I became aware of as I began to interview some of these authors who were benefiting from, again, some of the work you're doing there at Faithlife.
Yeah, it's been exciting to see those those different things grow. And, again, the Bible's at the center of everything we're doing. And that Lexham Press is a way for us to kind of get some of the academic content that we want to see available in Logos Bible software that we weren't able to license or find elsewhere available. And we also do that in print, too, because there's some people who are still comfortable with that. So Lexham Press titles are for sale at Amazon as well and in paper.
Well, again, let me just encourage those of you that don't have a Bible software program. This is certainly one that we've used. And as I said before, literally, if I had to have all those in book form, I would probably have to drive around with a U-Haul trailer, because there are so many books that I've loaded over the years, some of which are my own, and some are commentaries from various sources. Some are authors of individuals we've interviewed here at Point of View. And so I carry those around on a laptop, and it's just amazing what is available there. But just before we let you go, Bob, let's talk about how people can connect. They're saying there's a lot more at Faithlife than I knew there was. So how can they get involved, and what's maybe the first step for them to find out more at what is available at your website?
So equip.faithlife.com is where we have the homepage for our whole Faithlife Equip platform. So equip.faithlife.com. And that introduces you to the whole integrated ministry platform and how you can kind of get all those tools for the church together. They'll interoperate with other tools you already use, and, of course, with Logos Bible software. One of the most exciting things there is group reading plans, where you can start to have your congregation read a book together, which is another way to stay engaged when we're not meeting in person.
So again, Bob, I appreciate you being with us, and as you know, we certainly appreciate what you are doing there, and anything we can do to get more people involved in the Bible and Bible study, certainly a very good thing. So Bob, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you.
Let me just mention real quickly that if you have a young person, they're really digitally involved. And I've told the story more than once, but it's worth telling one more time, of this mother who actually had purchased the software, made it available to the kids. And it was one of those ones, kids, dinner, and she storms up the stairs because the kids are not coming down to dinner. She opens the door, and there is her son engaged in Bible study. And you got to, again, recognize that for the younger generation, this is the world they live in. And if these digital tools can help them understand more about God's Word, you don't mind them coming to dinner a little bit late. That's just an incredible example of the impact that this can have. And for those of us that used to shuffle books back and forth, just trying to do some research, it is wonderful. And if you're a seminary student, when you download some of this material, it already puts it as an endnote. And I've seen seminary students say, oh, I wish I had that when I was in school. And so there are just some great resources that are available. And so we wanted you to know about that at Faithlife, especially during the time when the pandemic and the lockdown have kind of changed our lives. And even the way we do church services have been changed. I think this would be a great resource for you and for your church. So find out more. We have it at our website, pointofview.net. We'll come back and talk about what's happening in Russia and the former Soviet Union through our friends at Slavic Gospel Association. Then we'll get back into the news. All that coming up right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/sign-up. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/sign-up. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
You know, one of the things we've said so often is while the pandemic and even the lockdowns have been an inconvenience, and for some have been life-changing because you've lost your job or you haven't had your financial security, or maybe you have been affected either directly or indirectly by the disease. As bad as it is here in the United States, it is much worse overseas. And one of those that we spent some time talking about is what has been taking place in Russia. We've tried to focus on different continents to talk about different ministries that in one way or another have been trying to provide food and meals and opportunities for spiritual care. And one of those, of course, has been at the Slavic Gospel Association. So we thought we'd give you a little bit of an update before we get back into some of the news that we'll be talking about today and looking at what is going to happen during the campaigns. We thought it would be good for you to have a chance to hear from Eric Mock, who is the Vice President of Ministry Operations for the Slavic Gospel Association. Just an incredible ministry that has a network of more than 6,000 evangelical church partners and hundreds of missionaries. He is an individual with master's degrees in international development and a Master of Divinity degree from Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, and joins us now by phone. So, Eric, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Well, it's my joy, Kerby. Thanks for having me.
Let's talk about this because I'm looking at some of the numbers here, but you have been able to provide more than 1 million of these meals to families due to hunger that is something that they've been facing because of COVID-19. Tell us more if you might.
Yeah, actually that figure is up to assisting churches in providing groceries to home, which works out to about 1.8 million meals, and that number is only growing. A lot of that is built on the fabric of the relationship with the churches that we've had, and then addressing the need in these communities. As you noted in the introduction, it is so difficult in these countries. It's a compounding effect, the pandemic, the loss of job, the income, the health, and it builds upon the other conditions that they had, and there are a lot of people suffering, but in the same time, through the suffering, God is sovereign. He's bringing people to faith, and we are seeing an exciting development in that manner, even in the middle of dark times.
One of the things we did is we did an interview earlier with Michael Johnson, of course you know, and he's been a friend of this ministry for many years as well. And we pointed out at the time how Russia was suffering. You know, at that time when we did that interview, we were talking about Italy. We may have been talking about a couple of other countries, and we were even talking about what was starting to happen in the United States. But when you go back and look at the numbers, the fourth highest number of people that have contracted the disease is in Russia, and the number that have died is really up there as well. So even though most of the mainstream media has not been covering what happens in Russia, that has been a place where the COVID-19 has hit even harder than many of the other countries that we oftentimes talk about.
You're exactly correct. And prior to this event, their healthcare system was really below what it needs to be to rightly care for the people. So when the pandemic hit, much like our own system, but even more pronounced in Russia, they were ill-equipped to handle this. And so it has been difficult for the people there. And I don't think that level of testing is anywhere near as pervasive as ours is. Therefore, I think a lot of the people are suffering with the virus, and it really just goes untested. And we are hearing even of pastors and others who have contracted the virus and died. It is very difficult times there.
You know, one of the things that I also have noticed is that if you look at the average monthly salary, even before this, this is a very poor country, isn't it?
Well, relatively, yes. And the work that SGA does extends beyond Russia into Central Asia and even to the Caucasus nations.
Yes.
And so the difficulties they have are sometimes hard for us as Americans to fathom. There was a doctor who had retired, and on her salary each month, she was only left $23 a month to put groceries on the table. This in the country of Georgia. And in Belarus, I had a story where a lady had just run out of food, and she was in despair because she couldn't feed her kids. she was outside picking dandelions to make a dandelion soup, and that's the only thing she could offer her kids.
Wow. I've read one story here of a Russian woman that was considering suicide just because she couldn't feed her kids. What about that?
Well, absolutely. That was actually in the Ivanovo region, outside of Moscow, kind of north of Moscow, and she looked upon her condition after she had lost her job. She was working in a small cafe. There wasn't enough to help her children. In fact, at that cafe, she was just bringing home leftovers for the kids with the virus. She had no job at all, no source of income, no way to feed the kids, and she wanted to take her own life. But she found hope by contacting the local church, and they brought both food and the gospel to her. And it was interesting because she was distant from God, and through these events, her heart has absolutely been softened. And now she's heard the gospel, and she's connecting to the local church there.
You know, one of the things I might make available, and of course you can go to your website, which we do have a link to. You can see the picture of some of these individuals, so they cease being just a story or a statistic, but really give you a chance to know a little bit more. And if you're not familiar with the Slavic Gospel Association, it's sga.org. You can find it right there. You can see some of the material that we're talking about here as well. We have one that also gives you a little bit of the history of the Slavic Gospel Association, so all of it is available at our website, pointofview.net. I thought I'd pick out at least one or two other stories before I let you go, and that is we have a Russian soldier that used to be very critical of Christianity and Christians, but that changed rather dramatically, didn't it?
Yeah, I grew up in a time where we were told to pick ourselves up by our own bootstraps, as it were, and he kind of had the same idea. This is Evgeny, and he basically had come to a point where he was completely self-reliant. He was a military man. He had fought in various conflicts. But then after having a family of his own and a child and the pandemic, and then he being sick, there was no one to care for him, no one to provide for the family. And it was only the Christians, the local faithful Bible-teaching church, that came to his aid. And he turned and came to the realization that maybe, just maybe, God is real. And in fact, he turned around and said, "I thank God for all the help." It was kind of an amazing thing to see in his life.
And again, gave him groceries, gave him a Bible. Again, this is a great kind of turnaround. And I think it illustrates, again, when you meet some of the physical needs, it gives you an entree to meet some of the spiritual needs. And I thought before we go, there was just one other story I thought would be kind of fun. Alcoholic Russian husband stopped drinking. You know, we always love it when we see individuals that begin to change their life and turn things around because, again, that's the power of the gospel, isn't it?
Amen. And the secret in here is that we're serving the local indigenous church. These are the churches that will continue to minister to these people. In the village that you're referencing about the alcoholic husband, this is in the village of Pokrovsk in the vast region of Yakutia in eastern Russia, where they have cities that have some of the coldest temperatures on the planet. And there was a family where the husband and his brother were both drinking and violent, and the local church, in fact, the pastor and his wife were the first believers to come to that region in 1984. In fact, they led the first 3 Stakha believers to faith. This was at their church, and they were out ministering to this family. And we've been doing this long enough to see this family turn, and the husband stopped his drinking and found a job, and his brother actually came to faith. And the abuse, there was abuse in the relationship, it stopped. And the avenue for access to them was our current pandemic. And through groceries and the gospel, the local church was equipped to do its work of living life on mission for the sake of the gospel.
Let me just mention that we have a link to Slavic Gospel Association. It's sga.org. You can click on that button that says Give Now. There's, of course, a challenge grant. There's a number of other ways in which you can help. And if nothing else, we have been trying as much as possible to talk about some of the regions of the world where, again, COVID-19 has been even more devastating than it has been here. And so, Eric, I appreciate you joining us today, giving us an update. We enjoyed the conversation with Michael Johnson, and we'll keep the relationship with Slavic Gospel Association because we appreciate the good work, and thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you to all your prayers, and your focus on this need will produce fruit. I really appreciate the open door.
Let me encourage you to go to the website, and that is a place where you can get some more information. And I would hope that you might even want to download some of this material, see some of these pictures, use it in maybe a presentation in your own church, and encourage your church to also support Slavic Gospel Association. But as an individual, you can do so and make a difference. It may be a real challenge with the pandemic and the lockdown here. It has been devastating in other parts of the world, and one place has been Russia. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let's, if we can, talk about the Democratic platform that'll be voted on. And very quickly, that is one of the articles that we have posted on the website. This comes from Jonathan Easley at the Hill. 5 things to know on the Democratic platform. I was going to post it, but since it has not been formally adopted tonight, then we will post it for tomorrow. We'll probably have a fairly extensive discussion about that on Friday. But here are the 5 things in this article in The Hill, which I think is pretty balanced. Again, you don't want to get somebody on who's just convinced that everything the Democrats do is wonderful, or somebody comes on and thinks everything the Democrats is wrong. This, I think, was an attempt to try to at least explain what is or is not in the platform. Point number 1, not every Democrat is backing the platform. Tonight, when you see a vote, you'll see that there are a number of delegates that have already pledged that they would vote against it because it's not progressive enough for them. But even even though there is some opposition, I don't see anything like a floor fight. If for no other reason, you don't have Democrats on the floor. This is just so different because we're dealing with a virtual convention. So you don't have people dancing in the aisles wearing funny hats and balloons dropping and all the rest. So it's so different than anything we've had before. But number one is not everybody's on board with the Democratic platform. Okay, got that. Number two, the platform seeks to paper over some differences. The Democrats decided that they wanted to try to feature everything from the former governor of the state of Ohio, John Kasich, who is a Republican, who tried to assure everybody that everything's just fine and Joe Biden is not going to turn left. I think he is, but that's another thing. And then they even had Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. They gave her all of 60 seconds. She had about a minute on there. But nevertheless, if you read through the platform, you're going to see some comments about the protests, removing Confederate symbols from public places. The idea of banning chokeholds is in there. But you're not going to see phrases like defund the police, just not in there. And yet you're going to get the sense that some of that is supported by many of the individuals running for Congress. No direct mention of the Green New Deal, but the platform has a section where it talks about climate change is a global emergency. We have no time to waste in taking action to protect American lives and futures. And so you really do get a Green New Deal kind of agenda, but not the words. Some comments about trade that look, frankly, like they were written by Senator Bernie Sanders, and rails against the trade deals and criticizes setting aside the North American Free Trade Agreement. Of course, Bill Clinton spoke the other night, and that's part of that. Third point, the Democrats embrace the public option, but give a nod to Medicare for all. The debate, which was within the Democratic Party between Medicare for all and expanding Obamacare, which was, in a sense, what was being proposed by Joe Biden, is there. Let me just hasten to say that if you've never listened to this program before, Medicare for all does not mean that you'll keep your Medicare. Medicare for all means you will lose Medicare, as you know it right now. It's simply called Medicare for all, but the Medicare program will cease to exist. And, of course, then there's all sorts of questions in there about whether you could keep your insurance. Unlikely, especially in light of some of the things that Senator Kamala Harris has said. Of course, we're going to have a chance to hear from her tonight and for both of them tomorrow night, so we'll see where that goes. Number four, the coronavirus is a top focus for Democrats. No real surprise there. Joe Biden, former vice president, has made criticism of Donald Trump's leadership in the coronavirus pandemic really kind of a centerpiece of his campaign, so that shows up. And then finally, tougher internal fights will come. Last piece here by Jonathan Easley in the piece that we've posted. He says, taken as a whole, the Democratic platform is designed with a very simple strategy in mind, to unite the party for the sake of defeating Trump in November. But as soon as that happens, some of these deep divisions and what he calls fissures will surface, especially if Joe Biden becomes the president, Kamala Harris becomes the vice president, if the indeed Democrats take over control of the Senate and retain control of the House. Which brings me to something else. Since we broadcast on a national program, I don't tend too often to talk about what's happening in individual states, but I think it'd be worth mentioning for just a few minutes because, first of all, those of you in North Carolina right now are looking at one particular race. This is a gubernatorial race where Dan Forrest should be at least in the ballpark with the Democrat, Roy Cooper, but is trailing, it looks like, by about 14 points. If you go to Michigan, because I know we have listeners up there, a lot of people are excited about the possibility that the Republican John James could win. He's trailing by only 3 points, so that may be one of those Senate races we'll be watching. Up in Maine, up until fairly recently, most people thought that Susan Collins would probably be tough to beat. But she's trailed in all four public polls at the moment by 4 or 5 points. I'll go to Arizona. Our listeners in Arizona, you've been watching Martha McSally. Now, she was actually appointed, but you would have sort of some possibility of being kind of a quasi-incumbent, and that would help. Especially since she only lost her other Senate bid by about 2.3 points, but she's consistently trailing the Democrat Mark Kelly there by sometimes as little as 2 points, but sometimes by as much as 12 points. Going to Kansas, you have Roger Marshall, who beat Chris Kobach and is maybe showing a lead of about 2 points, but not what you would maybe expect in that race. You go to Iowa, Joni Ernst is maybe in a tight race there. And then you have up in Colorado, the Senate race there with Republican Cory Gardner, who is, of course, running against the former governor, John Hickenlooper, who was also a presidential candidate. Seems to be down by about 6 points. And then our good friends in Georgia, you have something kind of unusual. It doesn't happen too often. You have 2 simultaneous Senate races there. And so far, you know, it will be interesting to see where that plays itself out. So those are just a couple of the key races, Senate races, gubernatorial races. But anybody that would have thought that an incumbent Republican president, Donald Trump, might have the so-called coattails to bring along other Republicans, that is not happening. And that in part is due to some of the reaction to Donald Trump. And if anything else, we even in one of my commentaries, I think I posted it yesterday, said we may have a record turnout for this election, in part, as Ari Fleischer said, because of both the love of Donald Trump and the hate of Donald Trump. So we'll see where that takes us. And indeed, those cases that and those races that we've been watching and those particular candidacies are going to be something that will be important. And even though we try to focus on the national focus, we recognize that you also are listening in a particular state, in a particular location. And from time to time, the polls don't look real good for some of those individuals that would be kind of pro-life, pro-family, limited government kind of individuals in the Republican Party. So we will continue to watch those and pay attention to that as well. If you would like to get some more information, first of all, I've mentioned this piece on the Democratic national platform. We'll post that for you to read if you would like to do so. And then we also have a couple of others. When we come back, I want to spend some time, first of all, talking with Robert Woodson, Bob Woodson of the Woodson Center. We'll be talking about some various issues related to both the convention and the African American vote. Also, the way in which history is taught in terms of the 1619 Project and his 1776 Project, and then what he calls the racial grievance industry. So we'll get into that with him. Then we'll come back and try to do a little bit of fact-checking on this conspiracy about the U.S. Postal Service, and then a piece that I've posted by Dennis Prager on everything the left touches, it ruins. So we'll certainly get into that because he says now we even see it in the area of science. So a lot to cover in the next hour. I hope you will stay with us. And if you'd like to join us at any point, we'd love to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212. You can find all the material we're talking about at our website, pointofview.net. And we'll be back right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
You know, we've had 2 days already of the Democratic National Convention, 2 more to go, and I thought it would be good to look at a couple of different issues. Certainly the speech that we had by Michelle Obama. We're going to be, of course, hearing from Senator Kamala Harris and others, so certainly addressing some of the issues of the African-American voter and people of color. And so I thought it would really be good to especially get Robert Woodson on for a couple of reasons. We've talked about some of the concerns with the New York Times 1619 project, and I've been very excited about his 1776 Unites, or his campaign on 1776. And if you're not familiar with Bob Woodson, he is the president of the Woodson Center, and certainly has been focused on things like poverty alleviation, empowering disadvantaged communities. His social activism really goes back to the 1960s when he was a young civil rights activist, but he also has directed the National Urban League's Administration of Justice Division, later served as the resident fellow with the American Enterprise Institute. From time to time, we quote some of his columns, and you may be familiar with his books, On the Road to Economic Freedom and The Triumphs of Joseph, How Today's Community Healers Are Reviving Our Streets and Neighborhood. Robert Woodson, a delight to have you on the program with us.
Oh, so pleased to be here. Very much so.
Let's, if we can, talk about your campaign, your 1776 campaign. I saw the very good interview you did with Mark Levin on that, and I wanted to make sure that not only did I talk about it, but let you talk about it for just a minute, because we've been so concerned that we oftentimes are getting a rewriting and a revising and a changing of Americans' history. And I know that's one of the reasons why you started that campaign in the first place.
Yes, the New York Times, under one of its black reporters and journalists, Nicole Hannah-Jones, authored a series of essays written by primarily black liberal journalists that was published as a special edition last August. They're called 1619, and what it does is try to rewrite American history. I call it revisionist history, by defining America's birth date, not in 1776 with the signing of the Declaration of Independence, but 1619, the occasion of the arrival of the first 20 African slaves on its shore. It then goes on to posture that because of slavery and the I call it America's birth defect, the fact that half of the signers of the Declaration of Independence were slave owners, because of the contradictions of what they did and what they wrote, the assumption is, therefore, America is flawed, forever flawed. It should, and its whole economy of capitalism was built on slavery, and therefore it should be defined as almost a criminal organization. And it even states that in its racism, it's in its DNA, and largely is contributing to the crisis in the black community today, that somehow the out-of-wedlock birth, which is 70%, the violent crime that is going on internally, is somehow these are related to the shadow of slavery and discrimination. And so their remedy, of course, is just reparations, but as a means of punishing white America, and black America should be compensated because of these ills. And so since they use the race issue as a bludgeon against the country, we thought it was appropriate for blacks primarily to step up to refute this false narrative. And so we've organized a group of 20-plus scholars, but we've also brought community activists together because we believe the best way to understand the importance of a virtue or a principle is to see it actually alive, operating in the lives of people. So we brought a lot of people whose lives have been redeemed as a consequence of the embrace of the virtues and values of our founders. And so we are offering not a counter-argument, but a counter-narrative that is inspirational and aspirational, where we actually go into the past to refute this notion that Black America is defined by slavery, to talk about right after slavery that the Black communities when they were faced with opposition from banks and whatnot, we formed our own Wall Streets that records prove that only 10% of blacks at the end of slavery could read. In less than 40 years, that number went up to 70%. This hasn't happened anywhere in the history of the world. And so we go on to give essays talking about the Black Wall Streets. There were 20 blacks who were born slaves who died millionaires. Mm-hmm. When we were denied access to hotels, we built our own in every major city. So what we're doing in 1776 is presenting an accurate history of America and saying that America should be defined not by its birth defect, but by its promise. That's why in every war defending this nation, blacks are willingly giving their lives to defend it, and not one was ever found guilty of treason. And so we believe that rich legacy needs to be celebrated. And so we're pushing back to defend this nation and recruiting people to understand that 1619 is presenting a false narrative, and that needs to be challenged.
Very well. And again, we have some of the information of the woodsoncenter.org, and it's 1776 Unites. Of course, it also links to other people we've had on the program, Dr. Carol Swine and others. And back to, just for a second before we take a break, the 1619 Project. Of course, she also, that is the principal author there, won the Pulitzer Prize. But I like what somebody said. It's the only time I think the Pulitzer Prize was given to someone who had to actually retract some of the statements that were in the essay, which one of those is the reason the American Revolution was fought was to defend slavery. That would have been a real surprise to Benjamin Rush, to most of the people in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, Benjamin Franklin, and all sorts of other individuals. But what I want to do is take a break because I want to come back and get some other your comments about that. One of which is, of course, you've written about our personal responsibility during the coronavirus. You've also been very critical of the fact that, especially this week with the Democratic National Convention, you haven't seen a lot of these leaders, at least in that party, condemning the violence in the street. And then maybe looking ahead, given the fact that last time about 89% of people that were identified as African American voted for Hillary Clinton, only about 8% voted for Donald Trump, what you think might happen in the next case. And if we have time, we'll also drop in the point that you made a minute ago about the lack of fathers, because we've had Larry Elder on this program. As a matter of fact, an individual sometimes sits in this studio for me as a host, Colonel Alan West, have all pointed that out as issues. So we'll talk about some of those, but if you find yourself saying, okay, I'd like to know a little bit more about this 1776 Unites program, it's available at the woodsoncenter.org. And whether you're African American or not, I hate to tell you, but the 1619 Project is maybe coming to a school district near you, and you need to know some of the answers. So we'll talk about all of that with Robert Woodson right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
America is currently in the midst of a contentious debate about whether to open the public schools and how to do it. Parents, teachers, and administrators have concerns about the risks and safety. Those are legitimate concerns that need to be addressed. But what needs to be called out are the actions of some of the teachers' unions. For most of us, the pandemic represents a public health problem. For many of the teachers' unions, it provides an opportunity to leverage state legislatures and put charter schools out of business. The editors of the Wall Street Journal say there's a phrase for that: political extortion. Another commentator called it educational blackmail. Give it the label you feel most appropriate. It's not a good look for educators. The American Federation of Teachers declared their support for safety strikes if local unions didn't approve of steps used in school districts to address the virus. Earlier this month, an alliance of teachers unions and progressive groups sponsored a national day of resistance and listed their demands before returning to the classroom. Most of the demands have little to do with education and can't even be addressed by school boards. They range from canceling rents and mortgages to passing Medicare for all to passing a wealth tax. A few demands do relate to schools, like implementing a moratorium on voucher programs and standardized tests, along with moving towards police-free schools. These teachers' unions also want a moratorium on charter schools and want governors and other political leaders to also close private schools. Public schools are funded whether they're open or not. Private and religious schools rely on tuition and donations. Many of these teachers' unions seem less interested in finding ways to open schools safely and more interested in threatening strikes to get their progressive wish list. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Racism, go to viewpoints.info/racism. That's viewpoints.info/racism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have with us for a few more minutes Robert Woodson, again, president of the Woodson Center. We have information about that on our website. We'll talk more about it in just a minute. But Bob, let me, if I can, maybe get your thoughts about something I know you've written about, and that is the unwillingness for at least the leaders in, right now, the Democratic Party, since it's a Democratic National Convention, to condemn the violence in the street. I mean, you have some people saying it doesn't exist or they simply ignore it. And you've been writing about that. Can you explain why we see so much quietness and silence about something that has really concerned people in a lot of these urban areas right now?
Well, it's the ultimate form of pandering. Every one of those candidates talked about, first of all, they ignored the violence that is going on in Portland, Oregon, where, and also the violence going on in these cities. They're unprecedented violence of black-on-black crime that's going up 40, 50% in some cities, and yet this is ignored. And also the violence on the streets in Portland are not reported in the mainline newspapers, and there's no reference. The only reference that each of the presenters with is that systemic racism and systemic racism, institutional racism, and it's the ultimate form of pandering. The assumption is that Black Americans are only concerned about race, that you don't have to take issues with them, but just race, and it's the ultimate form of pandering. Even Michelle Obama made an outrageous statement talking about the young woman, Clarence Floyd, and the young woman in St. Louis who was shot by the police, that somehow the list goes on and on and on, as if there are hundreds of black men and women being shot by the police, Well, the reality is only about 4 unarmed blacks were shot this year, and as opposed to for every one that was killed, 270 blacks were killed by other blacks. But she is giving this false narrative that somehow the biggest threat in the black community is being shot by a white police officer. And that's what's fueling this kind of violence that is going on in vilification of the police, which is resulting in them massive retirements, which is making all of us more vulnerable. In some cases, 911 calls are not being answered.
Sure. And again, you can see why some people in police right now, police forces are saying, if I'm not going to get supported, or if we're going to keep hearing the defund police, then I just am going to go find a place where I'm more appreciated. Because after all, when I strap on that uniform and that gun, I'm expecting that I'm going to be supported by the people in the city council. And if that's not taking place, I'm going to go elsewhere. You mentioned in passing about the issue of fatherlessness. I thought we might address that because that's something we've talked about with Larry Elder. It's something that almost every time Colonel Allen West, whether he's been a guest on this program or whether he's been sitting in for me, has brought up. And the issue of fatherlessness is something that has been affecting the African American community for some time. But as that percentage of fatherlessness has now made its way into the Hispanic community and even the Anglo community, we recognize the danger of not having a father in a home, haven't we?
Yes, but I think it's important historically that one of our scholars looked at the records of 6 major plantations at the end of slavery and found that 75% of those families had a man and a woman raising children. That tradition of nuclear families headed by men continued for over 100 years, even during the 1930s and 1940s during the Depression. When the unemployment rate for Americans was 25%, it was 40%. Blacks had the highest marriage rate of any other group in society. And because of our Christian faith, elderly people could walk safely without fear of being assaulted by their grandchildren. And so if we were able to maintain strong families and protected families during the time of the jury segregation, when racism was enshrined in law, how can we claim that somehow racism is responsible for the decline in the 60s of the program?
Kind of losing you a little bit on there. Yeah. Having a little bit of trouble with the audio there, but I know what you're saying, and that is, how can you say that was racism when indeed you had the strength of the family? And I think a lot of that goes back to something that was warned by who later became Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, but back there during the Johnson administration wanted to implement the war on poverty, but said that you would not receive benefits if there was a man in the home. So isn't it possible that the government program that was supposed to address poverty actually chased a lot of men out of the homes?
Well, it did. No, this was a deliberate policy of Cloward and Piven. These were sociologists at the Columbia University School of Social Work. They were socialists, and they said the way that we can force America to reveal its contradictions of capitalism is flood the system with welfare recipients. And so we should separate work from income and make welfare more attractive. But the government helped by also opening poverty offices that actually recruited people into the welfare system. So within a 3-year period, millions of blacks flooded into the system. And as a result, New York went bankrupt in 1973. And so that's when we saw the coming apart of the American family from the 60s until today.
One more question, and then I'll probably need to let you go. And that is that we are, of course, watching the Democratic National Convention this week. Next week, we'll watch the Republican National Convention. And the presidential campaign will continue on. And a lot of people maybe are only partially paying attention, but after Labor Day, many more. But at least last time, I think it was 89% of the African-American vote went to Hillary Clinton, and only about 8% of it went to Donald Trump. Do you see that changing this time in light of any of the changes that have taken place in our country?
Yes, I saw evidence of that in the gubernatorial election 2 years ago when DeSantis was running for governor against the black Tampa Mayor Gillum. and 100,000 black low-income people voted for the Republicans, split their ticket, even though Barack Obama and Oprah campaigned for the black candidate. And that's because of his position on choice and education. So I think that there's a major shift. And you're going to see, I think, at least 15 to 20% of blacks voting for President Trump this time because of the economic conditions of black have made some dramatic improvements. Also with prison reform and other initiatives, again, blacks are becoming much more sophisticated and willing to vote for a candidate based upon the issues and not always on race, as they are patronizingly assumed that they would do by the Democrats.
Well, and again, we've said in a few particular cases, the African-American vote has oftentimes been the swing vote in some of those states. You think of the election of Donald Trump because he won places like Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. By very small percentages, the African-American vote was there. And if indeed he won those states with 8% of the vote, if you talk about that African-American vote being twice the percentage, could mean something very different than what most people are seeing right now looking at some of the surveys. So as people go to your website, and again, it's the Woodson Center, they can find out more about 1776 and get some of that information because, again, I believe that we need to counter what's come from the New York Times, which is now being spread to all these schools in the 1619 Project, and I was very thrilled by what you're doing through the 1776 Unites. So what's available for our listeners if they go to your website?
Well, they'll see that we're developing curriculum. They will see examples of papers that document the fact that blacks were never defined by oppression, that they will talk about black Americans who fought in every war defending this nation. You'll see columns condemning the desecration of World War II statues, and you will see that the left, the ultra left, has really become a parasite instead of a protector of black American interests.
Well, again, Robert Woodson, thank you so very much. I appreciated the interview you did on Mark Levin. People can see that interview as well when they go to your website. And thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
And thank you.
Let's take a break. When we come back, I want to take on at least a couple of issues. Number one, what about all of the conspiracy surrounding the U.S. Postal Service? We keep hearing that there are mailbox being taken, there are machines and sorting machines being decommissioned, that there are an attempt to try to manipulate the mail-in ballots by affecting the Postal Service. And, of course, the head of the U.S. Postal Service, the Postmaster General, Louis DeJoy, will actually be testifying on Friday. But I want to tell you enough about him to know that you don't have to believe all the negative and vilified comments that are going to be aimed at him on Friday. But we'll get to that right after these important messages.
Sometimes I think about seeds. You ever stop to consider that some seeds become entire trees and some trees grow up and produce fruit? Other seeds become flowers or vines that bring us vegetables or berries. And some trees don't have fruit, but they're just pretty, especially in some parts of the country when it comes to the fall colors. Yes, sometimes my mind goes off like that. And I also think about such things when it comes to the seeds that so many have planted in the quest to impact our nation through Point of View Radio. You may think that your gift is a small thing, but like a seed, it can grow to have an impact beyond your imagination. If you want to see beauty again in America, consider planting a seed today and making a difference by joining the Point of View Truth Team. Get the details today, right now, by visiting pointofview.net/team or call us at 1-800-347-5151. Plant a seed for a great future. Cultivate truth. pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. As a public service, I thought we would try to debunk some of the stories, the conspiracy stories and myths surrounding the post office. This has gotten out of hand, and it is amazing to me that it's gone as far as it has, because people that have been spreading some of these rumors are members of Congress who should know better, and if they don't, should not be in Congress, but we'll leave that for another day. And also has been spread by the media, which again should know better, and all they had to do is check a few facts to figure this out. But again, this isn't just a few people making the statement. The former Vice President Joe Biden peddled stories of tractor trailers picking up mailboxes. You have members of Congress that were threatening at one point to throw the Postmaster General, Louis DeJoy, in jail. You've had posters of mailboxes that are supposedly being destroyed. And then you have some of these Twitter posts from even like actors and actresses and members of Congress and others that are, basically making it seem like, if nothing else, that you've got people working for the post office wearing Make America Great hats that are destroying all of these, which at its face is really hilarious, given the fact that the two major postal unions, that would be the American Postal Workers Union and the National Association of Letter Carriers, have both endorsed Joe Biden. So you really believe this? I mean, okay. We have posted an article that you can find, which is basically entitled "The Postal Service Not Stealing the Election." That comes from National Review. But since then, I found another piece that came out by David Ditch, works at the Heritage Foundation, and it really is probably simpler. It's debunking 10 myths about the Postal Service. I'm just going to pick about 7 just so that we can get through this. And each one of them just, I think, illustrates again how irresponsible some of these comments have been. And again, as a consumer of media, you need to exercise some discernment. Okay, myth number 1. The Postal Service is removing sorting machines, to sabotage delivery. NBC News making a big deal out of the fact that the Postmaster General Louis DeJoy decommissioning 671 postal letter sorting machines, and the argument that this is going to, in some way or another, affect the mail-in ballots that will be sent in. The reality is that the volume of mail has plunged in recent decades, due in large part to email, electronic communication. And again, the individual that is being criticized and will be giving testimony on Friday and probably vilified, Louis DeJoy, actually has been working for many years in this whole area of logistics, and concluded that some of these machines simply are not needed. He was the CEO of New Breed Logistics, which is a supply chain company, and he's really, over these years, focused on trying to maximize cost efficiency and on-time performance, and finally just said, okay, I give up. We won't do any of this until after the election, but this is the kind of stuff that needs to be done right now. Okay, myth number 2. The Postal Service is removing collection boxes to block mail-in ballots. You know, you've seen some of those blue collection boxes, and we've seen all sorts of pictures of people dragging some of these boxes around. Well, it turns out that the Postal Service, if you want to know these numbers, have more than 141,000 of these blue collection boxes spread around the country. And on a regular basis, these boxes are moved from low-demand areas to high-demand areas to maximize efficiency. You may have seen one picture of some of these being taken into one particular warehouse. That's because they were being taken into the warehouse where they refurbish them, paint them, and put them out there again. So there's 2 myths down the drain. Let's take a third one. This one just gets me even more. The Postal Service is locking collection boxes to prevent public access. And so here I'm looking at a Twitter post here. In your entire life, have you ever seen a locked mailbox at the United States Postal Service? And my answer is yes, I've seen them when I go into places where you probably don't go. This person writing this from Burbank, California, but let me take you to some high crime areas, and what oftentimes is done, if you've walked through those, driven through those, is that these locking caps are put on collection boxes when? After the last particular collection has taken place, and then they lock those so that it is more difficult for people to steal them. And so there has been a real problem in places where there has been mail theft to actually say that those are to prevent people from actually stealing those. And this practice wasn't implemented during the Trump administration. It was implemented many years before. And so that is another point. Just a minute, I'm going to take some phone calls because some of you working in the Postal Service can educate us on some of that as well. But let me take 1 or 2 more myths before I take a phone call. The Postal Service will go bankrupt before the election without a $25 million bailout. This one, of course, comes from Jerry Nadler, who's actually upset that because the COVID-19 a particular relief package didn't allow for mail-in balloting and a variety of other things. He's really criticizing that. But let's just face the fact that Congress has already provided another $10 billion loan to the Postal Service, and there are going to be some other benefits that will probably be given to the Postal Service as soon as you can get the Democrats back in session, which will be taking place on Friday. Number 5, the Postal Service plans to triple postage rates on mail ballots. This comes from a liberal organization saying the Postal Service has informed states that they'll need to pay first-class 55 cent, postage to mail ballots to voters rather than the normal 20-cent bulk rate. That nearly triples the per cost. Well, that has to do with the fact that in some of these states right now, they've been warned by the Postal Service that if you don't encourage people to mail their ballots before the last part of October, then you can't assure them that those might make them through with second-class mail. So in order to make sure they go through, they will have to use first-class mail rather than second-class mail, which is 55 cents instead of 20 cents. Let me take a phone call real quickly, and then I'll get back to a couple more of those myths. But I understand that you are a postal worker. So do they move some of these machines around?
Yeah, they're constantly doing that, a lot of times they're always, I've been with the Postal Service for 30 years, and they're always updating their equipment. So they're always replacing or doing away with a lot of machines that they no longer need. So the volume of the first-class mail has gone way down. So if they don't need the machine, instead of taking the space, they just maybe move it to another post office.
Sure.
Or they do away with the whole thing.
Yeah, decommission them. Sure.
Yeah, the new postmaster, all he's doing is trying to implement new ideas to try to save money for the post office instead of just throwing money at the post office like they've been doing for years and years and years. And the most where the post office is losing money is because they got to pre-fund their retirements 50 years in advance.
Oh, there you go.
So
that was one of the points I was going to bring up. I'm glad you brought it up because that's where a lot of the cost is. It isn't in something that shows up in the efficiency of the post office. It shows up in the fact that we provide, and I think you deserve, those of you that especially in your case work 30 years in the post office, benefits, and so they have to pre-fund those, which makes sense. That's what all the businesses have to do as well, right?
Yeah, that's true. And it was only 280 post offices nationwide that were implemented for the testing. And the rest of the post office is still working normal hours and stuff. We're still getting overtime like crazy because everyone's still shopping online, and it's been like Christmas since Christmas, you know.
For sure. Well, I appreciate you calling in real quickly. Just before I take a break, let me put one more on the table. That is, the Postal Service needs more money to process mailed ballots. And again, I would imagine, and I might even get some more letter carriers calling in and then after the break. But I don't know if you realize this, but the United States Postal Service handles 2.75 billion items per week. That's the number out of 2019. Now, as our caller just mentioned, that's actually increased a little bit more. And so because of that, their peak times usually happen between Thanksgiving and Christmas. Peak times right now because of a lot of people shopping online. But the bottom line is I think the Postal Service will be able to handle all of this, and especially if when we come back from the break, we talk about some of these mail-in ballots. There are a lot of reasons to be concerned about mail-in ballots, but the post office is not the reason. And I can go through all these other myths. I think I mentioned 6 of the 10. You get the idea. This is just crazy talk. And the fact that some of this is coming from, matter of fact, I didn't quote from our representative from California. I should have mentioned that one too, because there's a couple others. You just roll your eyes saying, I can't believe some of these members of Congress are saying these things in Twitter posts. But nevertheless, conspiracies are hard to tamp down, but this one really needs to die a very quick death. And you wouldn't know that it was a conspiracy because it's being presented as actual fact, sometimes in some of the videos being shown right now at the Democratic National Convention. Anyway, we'll come back. We'll get into some other issues right after these important messages.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Let me just mention as a program note, tomorrow we'll have Pastor Greg Laurie with us, and we'll be talking about kind of a virtual convention and outreach, but also get a little bit of an update on this issue that we've been talking about for some time, because we had John MacArthur, who actually has wanted to have church services in person in the sanctuary. Greg Laurie's figured out a different way to do that under a tent. We'll talk about that with him, and I think you'll really enjoy the conversation that we always enjoy with Pastor Greg Laurie. Liz Harrington, real quickly, also before we move on to the next topic, says, Democrats don't need to invent conspiracies to find problems with vote-in mail, she says. They could read the local newspapers or open their eyes. Since we broadcast over the country, let me give you a couple of examples. In Indiana, hundreds of ballot applications were sent with the Democrat box already checked. Oh, I'm sure that was just an accident. In Fulton County, Georgia, and also in Washington, D.C., ballots went missing. In Clark County, Nevada, Democrats sent out 1,325,934 ballots, and nearly as many were undeliverable as returned. Oh, my goodness. 223,469, 305,000. The other 797,465, well, they ended up piled up in apartment buildings and in the trash. Then we have, of course, the one she mentions that I did a commentary on, the so-called train wreck in New York that happened 2 months ago, where it took 6 weeks to even try to come up with who actually won that election, because 25% of those mail-in ballots were not counted, were considered to be invalid. Then, of course, we go to another one I've written about in New Jersey, that one taking place in the third largest city in the state of New Jersey, Paterson. And you had all sorts of problems on the Democratic side, but you also had them on the Republican side, because Republicans received ballots with no Republican candidates to choose from on those ballots. Isn't that amazing? And then, of course, in Paterson, New Jersey, the ballots were stolen out of mailboxes. People never received ballots, their votes cast in their name, but they said, I never voted. And then we have zombie voters. Yes, people that died a long time ago actually voted in that election as well. Statewide, a good portion of those ballots were rejected. And then, of course, you have the governor there, Phil Murphy, called it a success. Well, again, that's a little bit like what we saw Andrew Cuomo, the governor, the other day, actually speaking on the success of the dealing with COVID-19 in New York. I'm just, I just can't believe all of this. And so, if nothing else, the state of New Jersey, after there had this huge disaster in Paterson, now want to mail out 6 million ballots in November anyway. And they can be counted even if they're returned an entire week after the election. Think about this, if the vote is close. Again, nobody's expecting Donald Trump to win in New Jersey, but imagine if you're a senatorial candidate or running for the state senate or the assembly or whatever, you can see that as well. And by the way, since I've been mentioning this whole idea of Paterson, probably worth mentioning the fact that already 4 individuals in Paterson, New Jersey have been indicted for fraud, charged with unauthorized possession of ballots, including approaching voters and collecting their official mail-in ballots, which were not theirs. That's called ballot harvesting. For those of you in the state of California, that's actually legal in your state, but it's illegal in other states. And some of you remember the case of a congressional case in North Carolina, which had to be rerun because of ballot harvesting. So anybody that can look you in the eye and say there's no evidence of fraud has to pay very little attention to all of the facts I just mentioned and many others we've tried to bring to the table. And even if you dismiss the fraud issue, you still have to say the issue of overwhelming government employees at the election offices, government malfeasance. And again, I will admit that the post office, as the president has said, is sometimes a joke. Doesn't really necessarily always get the mail to you on time. But just before we end, one of the other articles I've posted here is from our friend Dennis Prager, who's been in studio with us. A while back, he wrote a piece called "Whatever the Left Touches, It Ruins," and he talks about how the left has affected education and the arts and sports and race relations and free speech and the rest. Well, now he adds one more to his list, and that is science. And he's got 4 points, and I'll read them real quickly because you can read it in its entirety. He says one example is science departments in universities throughout America that have declared their intention to hire physicists, biologists, and other scientists based on gender and race, not on their scientific expertise. Gives an example out of the University of California at San Diego, which is where my brother went for a short time and where my nieces actually went, in which they just simply only will take applications from people that fit the right category. Doesn't matter what your expertise is. You could be a winner of a Nobel Prize, but we're not going to take you because we want to have this kind of diversity. Number two, of course, he talks about the fact that you had this declaration, which we've talked about in this program, by more than 1,000 doctors who, on the one hand, always issued warnings against any kind of public gathering because of its health risk, but then went out of their way to not condemn and actually encourage any protest against racism because that's vital to our national public health. The hypocrisy on that is amazing. Number three, of course, he talks about one that we've also talked about quite a bit on this program, and that is the attempt by the left to completely vilify the idea that using hydroxychloroquine and zinc could be useful in COVID-19 infections. There have been very significant number of doctors and researchers that have concluded it is effective. But then he points out that one of the most prestigious medical and scientific journals in the world comes out of the UK called The Lancet. And that very prestigious journal had to effectively withdraw an article which was criticizing the effectiveness of hydroxychloroquine when it turns out that the article contained made-up data. As the New York Times reported, Dr. Richard Horton, the editor-in-chief of Lancet, called the paper a fabrication and a monumental fraud. Yes, it was. And then the fourth example he uses real quickly comes from the American Psychological Association, or the APA, where he says they were choosing leftism over psychology and declaring, this is the quote, 40 years of research show that traditional masculinity is psychologically harmful and that socializing boys to suppress their emotion causes damage that echoes both inwardly and outwardly. This is the whole idea of toxic masculinity and pathologizing, as he says, masculinity. And so those are just four more examples that he uses of where the left really has ruined almost everything it touches. And again, he makes a distinction, which I do as well, between the left and liberalism. Liberalism is the idea that, you have your view and I have my view, but I will defend your right to express that. Leftism said, no, you don't have your right to view. We're just going to assert things, and if you disagree, you're going to get labeled as homophobic, xenophobic, racist, whatever it might be, Islamophobic, you pick the term. And as a result, it stifles free speech. It stifles all sorts of educational issues. And in this case, really stifles even the scientific enterprise, which is a sad commentary. When one of the most prestigious medical journals in the world, like Lancet, and another one of the most prestigious medical journals in the world, the New England Journal of Medicine, have had to withdraw paper after paper, it is not a good time to be in the scientific community. And something needs to change, or we're going to not trust just about anything that comes out in some of these journals in the future. Let's take a break, though. We have to say goodbye for today. Tomorrow, don't forget, we have Pastor Greg Laurie, as well as a number of other guests, and I'm looking forward to that conversation. Hope you are, too. If you want to know more, go to our website, pointofview.net. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for the help behind the scenes. We'll see you back here tomorrow, right here on Point of View.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.